please take your seats. We have, again, an ambitious program, and this morning it will be in the excellent professional hands of Nick Andrews. So I hand over to Nick. And before, we are not at a coffee break yet, but I like to ask all of you, before the coffee break, to stay here to take a group photo. I will remind that just before the coffee break. Nick, up to you.
Thank you. This morning we're continuing our improving the use of the real-world evidence for regulatory and public health decision-making talks. Got 4 parts to this. We're going to start with Phil Bryan, who's at GSK, but many years at MHRA. I've known him for many years working there, collaborating, and he's going to talk about the Become project, which a number of us were there in June in Annecy talking about the collaboration between different partners in looking at real-world evidence. So over to you, Phil.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Morning, everybody. Probably the shortest person here, so I'll get this all the way down here. There we go. Okay, so I'm giving this talk not on behalf of GSK, but on behalf of the Become project, which is a number of vaccine manufacturers involved in that initiative. And just a disclaimer there that these views are not necessarily those of GSK or any of my former employers. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Thank you. All right. So, yeah, I mean, this has been quite an interesting one for me. As Nick's just said, I was more than 20 years sort of heading up vaccine safety at the UK regulator, the MHRA. And then sort of midway through the pandemic, I switched sides to join the industry. So I've kind of seen this project from both sides, which, you know, quite a unique perspective in terms of, you know, seeing the demands of regulators on industry and the challenges that industry face in dealing with that. And just to give a sort of a flavour of that, you know, I was involved for many years, both at European level and UK level, at, you know, developing guidance for industry on vaccine pharmacovigilance, things like good vigilance practice for vaccines, core pandemic risk management guidance, both in 2009 and then in 2019. And, you know, rightly or wrongly, depending on what your perspective is, you know, those guidances do place extra responsibilities and burdens on vaccine manufacturers from the point of view of pharmacovigilance and real-world evidence generation, you know, compared to most medicines. So that obviously does have additional challenges for the industry. And just one example of that, which, you know, was kind of a bit of a theme for this project, is that one of the things that, you know, we asked vaccine companies to do during the pandemic, both in 2009 and 2019, was to do these monthly safety reports, you know, rather than the usual 6 monthly safety reports that they have to submit to regulators. There's this requirement to give a monthly report. And the idea of that, you know, it was supposed to be this pragmatic, simple way of keeping regulators informed of emerging safety signals so that we could tackle them quickly in a pandemic situation. And that kind of worked in 2009, where clearly there wasn't the level of immunisation that there was in 2020. But I think in 2020, that idea was still there, but it kind of lost its way. It didn't quite work, and I think it turned into a huge burden, you know, not just for the manufacturers, but also for the regulators who are having to evaluate these reports on a monthly basis. And it did turn into quite a monster. And I think, you know, there is a need to reflect on that, because what it did, it really did suck resource away from what I would probably say more proportionate ways of doing pharmacovigilance and evaluation of safety data. And I think you've heard from other talks and Catherine yesterday about, you know, a real overemphasis, I think, being on kind of observed versus expected type of analysis versus other forms of, you know, pharmacovigilance where, you know, you could probably be a little bit more pragmatic. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that 2020 experience. And really that's what this Become initiative, that's how it started out, and that's what it's about. So what happened was, again, this all started when I was still at the MHRA, and I kind of joined it towards the end where we are now. But the idea really was these are the companies that were involved, some of the main COVID vaccine manufacturers, but also other vaccine manufacturers that weren't necessarily producing COVID vaccines, but they had an interest, in alignment on sort of methodological issues and regulatory interactions. So these companies got together during the pandemic, and I think what they were probably described at one point as therapy sessions rather than anything else, where there was different subgroups. There was a subgroup on background incidence rates, a subgroup on adverse events of special interest case definitions, another one on observed versus expected analysis. And what they were really doing, they were just trying to make sense of all of the different competing duplicative questions coming in from health authorities around the world, and just trying to get some sort of alignment in the way to manage those kinds of questions, and get some sort of, not harmonization, but some sort of standardization in the way these things were being handled. And it was quite a successful collaboration. And bear in mind that these are normally fiercely competitive companies that wouldn't really interact with each other. This was very much a non-competitive collaboration with a focus on methods and processes, and just trying to streamline things and do things in a more proportionate and evidence-based way. What then kind of came out of that was a publication. These were the sort of main people that sort of started this collaboration from the different companies, and this is a paper that they published last year or this year. And then, the conclusion of that was really to start this initiative called BECOME. And what BECOME stands for is Beyond COVID Monitoring Excellence. And, again, the idea was just to keep that momentum from the sort of peak pandemic period and say, there's lessons that we can learn here that aren't just applicable to a pandemic situation, that will be applicable to routine immunisation going forward. So the idea was to try and sustain this level of collaboration in a non-competitive way. And as I'll come on to, is just to broaden the collaboration, so it's not just industry, but multi-stakeholders. So, these were the benefits really of working that way. These groups were able to look at the issues around real-world safety, data generation. It is, in that sense, then it was mostly spontaneous data and passive data. We know that is real-world data. But also, there's a lot of questions from regulators on, past studies and pregnancy registries, and pretty much the same question, but asked in different ways from different health authorities. So it was really just tackling this, trying to tackle it at a global level. Now, it's difficult to get anyone to harmonise, not at least regulators. I don't think harmonisation is necessarily a good thing, because every country or region will have different needs and requirements. But there is a way to get more alignment, and particularly, again, one of the things we touched upon yesterday was there was a sort of a drain in expertise during the pandemic. A couple of the companies that I've worked with over the past couple of years, I think they must have recruited about 100 medics just to evaluate single case reports, because some regulators are asking for observed versus expected analysis of everything. Others are asking for individual causality assessment for every case. And that probably works for something like vaccine-induced thrombosis, which is, vaccine unique, where there might not be a background and you can do individual case assessment. But they were also asking things of this, for things like Guillain-Barré syndrome, myocarditis, where there is a background. And so that, the value of individual case assessment for every case is, pretty limited. So you can imagine the drain that had. Everybody's trying to get hold of a medic, everybody's trying to get hold of an epidemiologist, and there's just this huge suck on resource. And I think that's one of the things that kind of we do need to think about again for the next pandemic, is how we can streamline and be more proportionate, and not just better use of evidence, but better use of people when that when that pool of expertise is limited. So the idea behind this project really is to take those lessons and challenges from the pandemic, take it forward really, and try to have sustained collaboration, but then not just within industry, but multi-stakeholder collaboration. So we're talking here about regulators, health authorities, non-government organisations, pretty much everybody who's got an interest in vaccine safety, and not just vaccine safety. I mean, this can also become vaccine effectiveness, because it is essentially about real-world data. So this is the mission statement for the BECOME project. It's really, I won't read it out all, but it's essentially to foster collaboration, on a multi-stakeholder level, including patient groups. And, admittedly, up until now, this has just been, focused on industry and regulatory interactions. But as it goes forward, we do need to think about the public, the wider public and patient groups, particularly in the context of communication and acceptance of some of these vaccine issues. And to keep the momentum, beyond COVID, as it's entitled. So these were some of the sort of main working groups that were identified, or the main topics of priority topics, if you like, that were identified as part of this project to take forward. And again, the initiative now is under the umbrella of IFPMA, but again, I think as it moves forward, the idea is to take that beyond an industry initiative. So the main topics really, signal detection, obviously looking at different types of safety data sources, not applying a one-size-fits-all, method to safety data signal generation, and treating the different types of issue on their individual merits and what the best method might be, rather than applying observed expected to everything. The conduct of safety studies, the conduct of pregnancy studies and pregnancy registries, of course, vaccine benefit and effectiveness. And one theme that really sits across it all is enhancing all of this, not just in high-income countries, but low to middle-income countries too, for all the reasons that we've already heard about, yesterday. And then to really look at digital innovation, again, in making sure that we maximise the use of the tools that we have, and minimise the manual work when we're dealing with vast volumes of particularly spontaneous data. So the next, what's most recently happened with the initiative is that we held a multi-stakeholder conference back in June in the lovely Lake Poncier in Lake Annecy. And we invited delegates from across the stakeholder spectrum: regulators, public health authorities, non-government organisations, supranational organisations, academia, industry. And there you can just see a snapshot of the representation that we got. And it was a great, it was well attended. It was a fantastic conference. And the idea was just for everybody, not necessarily to represent their organisation, but just to bring their own reflections and their own experience, and to have open and frank and honest discussions around all of these challenges that we brought to the table. And quite a few of the people in the room today were at this conference. So the objective really, again, it wasn't to get harmonisation or consensus, but it was just really to have a cross-stakeholder discussion, to get broad alignment and dialogue on what the priority areas are that we need to tackle going forward, and to try and achieve some level of alignment. And then really the objective is to develop an action plan. We talked about a 5-year action plan, to identify what these priorities are, and then have an action plan to tackle them in a collaborative way. So the title of this talk is to become real-world evidence roadmap. Now, as we speak, a publication of the conference and the action plan is in development. So this might be a bit higher level and short on detail, but that is intentionally so. I don't really want to preempt what we're still working on. But this is really just to give an overall flavour of the things that we are looking at and what those priorities will be. And it isn't just limited to generation of real-world data from electronic healthcare records and so on. It is about better use of spontaneous data, better use of published data, anything that is in the real world. So those bullets on the slide there just outline the broad priorities. Again, it's not limited to this. There's a wider scope. But it's really about better awareness, visibility, understanding the different data sources at global level, and how best we can leverage those different data sources for both safety and effectiveness studies. More alignment across health authorities in guidance and acceptability of data. Again, that's a bit of a common theme from what we heard about yesterday. Is again, I'm not going to use consensus or harmonisation, but just a better alignment in, just to sort of minimise duplication and get a better understanding of, what the acceptability is of certain types of data for decision making in vaccine. I'll call it life cycle management, because I do think we have to think about this not just from a post-authorization point of view, but from, getting products to the market quicker, having confidence in a risk management plan. And by a risk management plan, that also includes in a plan to look at effectiveness. Because, we touched yesterday upon, vaccines being authorized based on correlates of protection, where we don't know the validity of those, and having confidence in the plan, to test those assumptions and validate them in the real world, which will get vaccines, to the public and to patients and vaccinees in a much quicker way. And really, to refocus again on some of the things that have just crept in over the last few years about the value of certain types of analysis. And I think particularly observed expected analysis, where I do genuinely think there's a huge overemphasis, and it's not being looked at in a risk proportionate way, and is sucking a lot of resource across stakeholders, I think, certainly has been in the pandemic. And then obviously along all that is, looking at this at a global level, including low to middle income countries. So, conclusions, what led to Become was a successful collaboration, a non-competitive way. It allowed companies to work together and to share great ideas and come up with some solutions to what were common problems. And, I just know from my experience at that time as a regulator that regulators were facing many of the same problems. They were dealing with huge volumes of data. And again, I'm sure, they would probably value some sort of proportionate, way of doing that going forward as well. So, again, I haven't got the answers or the solutions or the funding model to how this might work going forward. But, needless to say, I think everyone kind of agreed that the best way to take this kind of thing forward is through some sort of public-private partnership or cooperation, however you want to call it, with the right governance so that it can be joined, by multi-stakeholders. Now, I don't have the answers. I think that is the next step. So what we're going to do now is just produce this paper from the conference. We'll highlight what the priorities are, and then we'll think about how best to take that forward, at a global level, bringing everybody on board. So I think that is my final slide. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Phil. So, open for any questions. So, Phil, we've got a couple of minutes for those. So, anything online from the back, Fran? Nothing. I will manage the online. Oh, you're there. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. No. Okay. Anyone else? There's a microphone in the middle. I think it's working best. If you've got questions for Phil, if not, I was in the meantime. I was wondering what is the next step. I think a lot of planning by the sound of it, but I'm assuming, it was good to see that collaboration bringing together all the different partners in June, and I'm assuming the plan is to try and keep everyone on board as we go through this 5 years. And
Well, we don't want anybody running away right now. So again, I don't want to use the word consensus or harmonisation. It's not easy to do that, but there seemed to be, there really did seem to be an appetite at that conference for, I think, most people agreed that these are things that we need to tackle. So there was certainly an appetite, to tackle it. And I guess the only thing, not scratching our heads, but the only thing we couldn't say, what is the best way to do it? How can regulators work with industry? How can public health authorities join that? And it's always been a challenge is to break down those barriers. But we just don't want to find ourselves in that situation again with the next pandemic. And this isn't just about preparing for the next pandemic. It is about, as I say, it's about routine vaccines and all vaccines. So there's lots of initiatives ongoing out there. We've heard of a few of them, and there's lots of other public-private partnerships which are happening. So it's just to have more dialogue, keep people together, keep people, working together informally now, if that's okay within their governance, and then try and, solidify that and make it more formal. So I don't have an answer to the question. I've just waffled there, but you get the idea.
Hector?
No, I think it was a very nice conference, and these are very good ideas. What I'm thinking is finding one or two practical ways of moving forward that show that groups are able to cooperate. Maybe, for instance, pregnancy registries could be used for different products, right? Case definitions could be used for every regulator for every product, because most of the things we deal with, Guillain-Barré syndrome, etc., in this case, myocarditis are common. Yeah. There are a few other things, but it would be, I think, useful maybe to find one area of collaboration and show that it can work, and then get others on board. But
yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea, Hector. Pick something not that's easy, but that everyone can work together on, and then build the relationships from there. I mean, that's a really good idea.
Okay, great. I think we're at time, so thanks very much.
Thank
Phil.
you very much.
And great. So we're moving on to Bob Chen from the Brighton collaboration and many years at CDC working on vaccine safety. I think many of us know Bob. So he's going to be talking about Brighton collaboration and real-world infrastructure for vaccine safety.
Thank you to the organizers for inviting us to present. And this is in partnership with my colleague, Rebecca Chandler from CEPI. So Brighton has been around since 2000. Our mission is to enhance the science of vaccine research by developing internationally accepted methods for monitoring vaccine safety. And the challenge is that vaccine safety generally cannot be assessed directly. We have to infer it indirectly from absence of multiple adverse events following immunizations. But such rare AEFIs are going to be easily missed if you didn't have standard case definitions in place. And so in our intervening years, we developed 70 plus case definitions and have growing global interest and use of the case definitions and membership. So back in 2017, as you heard from Jakob's presentation, CEPI got started, and it seeked to develop vaccines against a number of pathogens. But it did have this risk that with each sponsor using their own approach, a safety signal may be missed in a single trial. So this became an opportunity for Brighton and CEPI to partner together on this safety platform for emergency vaccines, or SPEAK project, where we would try to harmonize vaccine safety assessment across the CEPI portfolio. And then, as you heard from Jakob, we now have this additional challenge with the 100-day mission. How can we speed that up even further? And one thing was that we recognized that in the vaccine development domain, historically vaccine safety assessment within pre-approval clinical trials tend to be done separately from the post-approval RWE, and that you tend to have kind of divided and separate staff that became a barrier to implementing a life cycle approach. And then we have this additional challenge for the low and middle income countries where there's the large administrative data sets that we use in high income countries are missing, and that's really the domain that the CEPI is working in. So, so we kind of develop a number of kind of work packages trying to address these issues, and there's 3 that are in the pre-approval and a number that in the post-approval, kind of depending on when they start. And I'm going to describe these in greater detail. So the first work package focused on data safety monitoring boards led by Steve Black and Corey Decker, where we want to make sure that we've trained a pool of people with experience or at least knowledge about DSMB. Historically, these were formed without actually kind of formal training, and they provide oversight, importantly, in the pre-approval process. And in fact, historically, there's actually no requirement that people have any safety expertise in order to sit on DSMB, so we want to try to overcome that shortcoming. And then The other thing was we created a meta DSMB for the first time, where we have liaisons to the different CEPI-funded developer DSMBs, and to bring that knowledge back to make sure that nothing falls in between the cracks. The important part is the next group of standards and tools led by Barb Law, where we try to identify potential adverse events of special interest based on the vaccine safety evidence and the target disease pathogenesis. We want to make sure that the prioritized AESIs have standard Brighton case definitions if they have not been developed already. And then we, in addition to the standard Brighton case definition, we develop something called the companion guides, where it has multiple components, including information like risk factors for that AESI, what's the population-based background incidence for these observed versus expected assessments. And then importantly, in this data, in this era of real evidence, RWE based on databases, what are the medical codes that we should use to enable these searches? And then when you find these cases, what are the case report forms and algorithms to allow for uniform assessment of these case definitions? Then we have a group that focus on vaccine safety templates that allow for kind of standardized key benefit risk assessments, and they function a little bit like a pilot's checklist to manage multiple complex risks across different domains. And initially, as a developer develops their product, obviously there will be gaps in information, but hopefully that standardized template allows them to prioritize which areas they may want to do their future research on to fill those gaps. Then we have a number of work packages that are mostly beginning in the post-approval process. So one that we mentioned throughout the day is yesterday is on special populations, and we've kind of have kind of three initially in mind: kind of pregnancy, pediatric, and the immunocompromised. And the goal here is to develop tools for inclusion of these three special populations during the development, evaluation, and implementation of vaccines for emergency pathogens. We develop kind of a panel resource of specialists with expertise in this domain to support the developers and the different other stakeholders to allow for expedited and efficient inclusion of these population and data for these populations. We have one that recognizes the need for kind of active vaccine safety surveillance, especially in LMIC settings where historically the infrastructure is limited. The tools that we're focusing on is kind of a mobile phone app, a pregnancy registry protocol. We plan to do a rapid landscape assessment for kind of each of the CEPI pathogens that are approaching kind of approval and hopefully use. We want to kind of assess what are the different target countries in terms of their capacity for active surveillance and coordinate them this process with the CEPI research network sites. And this is the standard table. This table looking at kind of the sample size needed to study different incidents of adverse events and a different relative risk. And we recognize that if we could get to the 50,000, 60,000 range, then we can kind of get beyond the clinical trial data sets, and that the cohort event monitoring, SEM methodology is something that has been done in low and middle income countries. And if we could do, for example, 5 countries at 10,000 each, or 3 countries at 20,000 each, we can start to get into those reasonable sample sizes. And during COVID, we saw that at least in high-income countries, U.S., for example, vSafe got over, into the millions range in terms of rapid enrollment. So with the increasing penetration of mobile phones in LMIC, this is something that we want to explore, in that at least is the beginning of a digital cohort database that may allow other studies to be piggybacked onto them. Then one group that is not part of SPEAK, but is a kind of a sister project, is called the International Network of Special Immunization Services of INSIS. In that, I think at the end of the day, our goal is not only to detect and quantify the risk, but hopefully also understand its pathogenesis and prevent it, because that ultimately is what the public want. And whenever we detect a risk, yes, it's good to know that risk exists, but they simply want us to try to get rid of it, if at all possible. And historically, we simply have not done that in a timely manner. We've known that GBS is caused by flu vaccine going back to the swine flu days, and yet today we don't know what causes it and how to prevent it. And similarly, for each of the subsequent major AESIs, be it intussusception, be it narcolepsy, we still have no good way to prevent them. And so we really need to invest in a big way to up our game, if you will, to meet that major public expectation of where vaccine safety should get to. And so we hope the INSIS will begin to do that by focusing on genomics and other omics of TTS and myocarditis from COVID-19 vaccines for now, and then eventually we'll hope to expand funding to other AESIs. And this is a separate award from CEPI from the SPEAK project. And then we have this work package that's focusing on digital transformation. So classic Brighton case definitions are in PDF, which is not really very useful for kind of this modern age. So we hope to digitize our different vaccine safety products and services for each of our different work packages. We've hoped to form living laboratories where we could partner with colleagues out there working in vaccine safety, and then we could kind of learn each and work with each other in terms of real world data sharing for kind of constant quality assurance assessment and improvement beyond the initial kind of once in a lifetime case definition development, which is very static. We want to shift from that model to kind of evolutionary improvement, and then hopefully form a case definition service where we have rapid development and a life cycle management, referencing catalogs of how case definitions and studies are using and implementing them, so that during peacetime we have that understanding of that, all those relationships, so that we could easily gear up in an emergency setting. And so kind of, as I mentioned, kind of the traditional case definition development was kind of a year-long process based on volunteers for Brighton, and the advantage of that was just kind of a one-time cost. But hopefully we now are shifting to recognition that we need a life cycle management of these case definitions, because medicine does change and evolve, and definitely how data becomes available in the RWE world changes, and how do we best manage that in terms of how different people are adapting our case definitions for use in their different contexts in their countries. And so by first cataloging that, we hope then to move to the future where we could, as I mentioned, create these living labs and apply them, and allow kind of better understanding of these different estimates. As Phil mentioned, this, the observe versus expected as a static model is really not a great one. And so we hope to move forward, but obviously all of these have ongoing costs instead of just one-time static costs. In summary, much of safety assessment new products have deferred to post-introduction. The SPEAK is a major initiative by Seppi and Brian to develop tools in the pre-introduction phase that links and harmonizes with post-introduction. And with that, we hope to establish a RWE infrastructure for vaccine safety during early deployment. This model is applicable to other pathogens in addition to what CEPI is focused on, and we obviously have other AESIs beyond those CEPI pathogens that we hope to expand to, and we welcome your thoughts in terms of what else we could do to improve this linkage into a life cycle approach to vaccine safety. So
great, thanks. Thanks very much, Bob. So, yeah, if you've got questions, do go and use the microphone. Thank you. Let me know if there's anything comes up online.
Thanks so much for the presentation. It was really wonderful to hear all this work, and it's so incredibly important. It's just as you're speaking, just as we're having the Become presentation first, and as you're speaking now, I mean, I was thinking about, having worked at GSK's vaccines and AstraZeneca, so in industry for a long time. I mean, we have run a lot of, safety surveillance initiatives in different places. So, I mean, as part of the pneumococcal conjugate work at GSK vaccines, there was big safety surveillance that was carried out in Kilifi in Kenya. As part of the malaria vaccine programs, there was big surveillance for effectiveness and safety that was set up across West Africa. At AstraZeneca, we set it up for COVID vaccine in Botswana. So I'm just wondering, is there, something here also about collaboration and support and kind of building off? I mean, it was a huge effort and huge amount of investment from companies to run these programs. So I'm just wondering if there's something here to build off of and thinking about some collaboration.
Yes, very much so. So that work package 6, the reason we selected Dr. Andy Stakachis from University of Washington to head that was that he kind of headed a review funded by Gates Foundation back at this point close to 10 years ago of trying to, how do we start to think about beyond these fragmented one-off studies in LMIC and to somehow make them coalesce into something more sustainable. And so he's been thinking about this challenge and this issue for a long time, and that's very much what we hope to do with this work package is to
recording
be able
in
to
progress.
kind of bring that together along with the Become initiative that you mentioned.
I think one more, Rebecca.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, so I work with Bob. I mean, I'm the CEPI vaccine safety lead, and I think you're touching on something that is very much an area that CEPI would like is very interested in looking at as well, is to establishing these partnerships in the local regions. Certainly, we don't want to lose that knowledge and those capacities. So I think with the help of Andy helping us map these things, we're actually, really would like to move into setting up these partnerships and using, bringing these case definitions and bringing those tools and having them use it and to help set up these networks in support of the developers and academics to be able to execute these post-marketing commitments and that sort of thing, rather than having to recreate the wheel every time and every developer going in and starting from scratch. I mean, we can't afford to do that anymore. And I think in collaboration with a lot of the work that's going on with the African Medicines Agency, I think this is critical because we know that a lot of these regulatory agencies in these countries are asking for post-marketing are requesting things from developers. So we see that as very much a service for them as well. So I think we're on the right track. We just have to coordinate our efforts because I think a lot of the pieces are there. It's simply a matter of putting them together and, of course, showering some money on it.
Great, thanks. I think we'll move on there. So, I mean, actually, the LMIC question is something that I think might come up now with Kat Bollatz, who's from P95, who's filling in for Tom Verstrassen here, going through what we're going to be looking at during the breakouts today, I think, after our discussions yesterday. So.
Okay.
Yesterday we discussed about the things that went well and not so well during the during the COVID-19 pandemic, and TTS and Janssen was a good example, but there were also some not so good examples. But still, if I reflect on all the presentations from yesterday, and starting with Jacob's presentation on how we can go faster and the CEPI's 100-day mission, and I'm coming back to things said by different people of you, different people. Then, yesterday evening, we also had a discussion with the facilitators from the different breakout groups, and we thought, like, maybe if we want to go faster, because this is actually also the topic of this meeting, like the role of real-world evidence for regulatory and public health decision-making for accelerated vaccine development. Then we were thinking, and probably maybe it's a bit bold thinking, so how can we use real-world evidence even instead of phase 3 trials? And what are the condition scenarios under which this might be plausible? So that was actually what we think would be a good topic for the third breakout session. Like, we were happy with things that went during the COVID-19 pandemic. There were still a bit of shortcomings, but actually, to be honest, we did fairly well compared to what we have been able to achieve before, but even we want to go faster. And what can we do to go faster? And maybe having an alternative for phase 3 is the way forward. And then for the fourth breakout session, and this is also something that that was regularly brought up, that there is limited infrastructure, especially in the low and middle income countries. While we do have databases in high income countries, we don't have these in the low and middle income countries. So what are the requirements in terms of infrastructure and people training to generate real world evidence in low and middle income countries? So, that's it.
I mean, yeah, we can discuss about this. Thanks. I mean,
May I show the breakout
came
questions
through. Have you got the reminder of who's in which one? This is later, though, isn't it? So.
Okay. Oh no! Wait. Like, you can show the two questions, please. No worries.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one. I mean, and we're talking about the sort of overcoming the barriers, aren't we? In some respect, in these. So it's what the requirements are, but it's not just what's required. It's kind of how do we get there? What are the barriers to getting to those? To what's needed, and overcoming those. Certainly on number 4. I mean, we had a little bit of time to. I mean, we don't want to solve these ones now, but maybe if anyone has any comments on the questions themselves, I don't know. You wanna? This was back from your moderators, though, from the facilitators from yesterday, that we kind of boiled it down to. First one was perhaps
Jacob,
quite interesting.
Maybe? Hector, maybe? I mean, yeah.
Like, think we're anyone think we're miles off on what we're suggesting we discuss? Or
without solving it, right? Teasing.
Yeah, maybe reflecting on which regulatory pathways would allow it, describe them, and describe briefly those requirements. For instance, I presented yesterday on accelerated approval regulations, which are standard. So how does a product qualify for accelerated approval? What does it mean? And why is that useful? And would that allow the use of well-defined, well-implemented, fit for purpose use of real-world evidence? That could be a start.
Well, you looked at me, so I'm. What I'd really like to do is support your question 3. And this is really getting to the meat in pandemic preparedness, or accelerating vaccine deployment rather than vaccine development in a crisis, if you will. And I think we will all agree that the only way right now to skip a phase 3 trial is if you had an accepted correlate of protection and you establish vaccine efficacy indirectly via the immune response, and then you confirm this clinically in real-world evidence of phase 4 trials. But maybe there's other ways. Can we leverage on existing vaccines, on experience that we have generated from licensed vaccines, from other vaccines? Look at influenza world, or maybe SARS-2 at least. I shouldn't say coronaviruses. There's too many different coronaviruses. I think the spectrum of coronaviruses is much broader than the spectrum of influenza viruses, actually. But this is something that we, scratch our head around at the moment, and would be really interested in hearing input from this group. Thank you.
So we can get into that in a second. But let's have a last one from Bob. I just realised this was only supposed to be 5 minutes. I thought we had longer. So yeah, Bob, and then we'll move on to Liz.
So to me, the number 3, one big question is that in certain countries, I guess in the EU, for example, emergency use authorization is not a category that exists at the moment. And presume that would be true for many other countries and NRAs around the world. So potentially that could be the part of what the breakout 3 discussion might be.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Kat. So that's what we'll be doing later. Yes, so let's move on to Liz Miller, who's I've worked with for over 25 years, I think I've worked out, who's going to be talking about the... Oh, no, it isn't. Why did I think you were giving a talk? You're facilitating. Apologies. Well, I'm passing. Yeah, you had a talk ready. I'm passing over to you we're going to start the breakouts, aren't we? Apologies. Here you go. I thought we had a talk. That's sorry. Okay. So Liz will be facilitating, but right now, let's go into those sessions.